welcome to the About That podcast with me, your host, your favorite geek psychologist, your favorite pop culture enthusiast, your favorite queen of the nerds, Dr. Vanessa Hintz. I am coming to you today, my friends, with barely leashed excitement to talk to you about one of my most favorite things I've ever, one of my most favorite book series on the entire planet. A book series that, like many folk, got me back into reading. Reading not just because I had to, reading because I wanted to. I'm talking about none other than the Empyrean Series by Rebecca Yarros. For those of you who have already engaged, I have a couple episodes in which I talked very explicitly and in a very detailed way about my opinions and my love for the first book in this series, Fourth Wing. And I am following that up today, good people, with my thoughts, opinions, love, enamoring of the second book in this series, Iron Flame. So Iron Flame was released in November of 2023, about 6 months after Fourth Wing, and apparently in the literary world, this is like absolutely unheard of for books to come out in back to back in this way. I mean, for real, y'all. Like, how long have we been waiting for my man's George R.R. to write that next Game of Thrones book, right? Like, how long? We've been waiting for years. I don't even know. Anywho, Rebecca Yarros released these two books within the same year. And like many, many, many folk, I was enthralled, enraptured. It captured my heart, my soul, my everything. And so I want to start this conversation and read the description actually from the author's website about what Iron Flame is about. And I quote, "Everyone expected Violet Soaringale to die during her first year at Basgiath War College, Violet included. But threshing was only the first impossible test meant to weed out the weak-willed, the unworthy, and the unlucky. Now the real training begins, and Violet's already wondering how she'll get through. It's not just that it's grueling and maliciously brutal, or even that it's designed to stretch the writer's capacity for pain beyond endurance. It's the new vice commandant who's made it his personal mission to teach Violet exactly how powerless she is, unless she betrays the man she loves. Although Violet's body might be weaker and frailer than everyone else's, she still has her wits and a will of iron. And leadership is forgetting the most important lesson Basgiath has taught her. Dragon riders make their own rules. But a determination to survive won't be enough this year, because Violet knows the real secret hidden for centuries at Basgiath War College, and nothing, not even dragonfire, may be enough to save them in the end." End quote. Woo! Like, I just got goosebumps reading that because this story is super tight. This story, Iron Flame picks up like immediately after Fourth Wing. Like, we're in the same scene. Like, if we were watching this as a play, like they didn't even change the set. Like, we're in the exact same scene. And so the story picks up after Violet, our main character, becomes privy to many things. Many, many secrets are uncovered, right? She learns that there's a whole revolution that's happening, including that her previously believed to be deceased brother is like a leader of this revolution. She realizes that the love of her life, the love of many people's lives, mine included, Zayden, hasn't told her everything, right? Like, he has been holding a lot of information that he hasn't shared with her. And so this sort of leads her to a place where she's questioning like the validity of her feelings for him, right? The other thing I'll say, just sort of narratively, about Iron Flame is that the book is divided into two parts. And for me, those are part one, which is year two at Basgiath War College, and part two, which is in Orisha, where the revolution is happening at Ryerson House, okay? And spoiler alert, I don't know why I'm going to say this. I'm going to say this. Your engagement in this episode means that you're not going to come from me if anything is spoiled for you. Like, please don't listen to this if you haven't read the book. Like, within the first 30 seconds of this, spoiled the whole story. So, my bad. Sorry, not sorry. Your continued engagement, your listening to this from this point on, is affirmation that you're not going to be upset. It's affirmation that you are consenting to hearing all the spoilers that I'm going to share. Nonetheless, I want to just situate myself in sort of how I am engaging with not only this conversation about the story, but the story in itself. So at the time of this recording, I've read the series, and at this point, the series is 2 books. I've engaged with the series like a total of 4 times. And so I've read each book twice and I've listened to it twice. My way of engaging with books, I listen to audiobooks first because listen, y'all not about to catch me slipping and not knowing how to pronounce names and people and stuff. Like y'all ain't about to have like my internal narrator like not knowing how to say all these names with all these consonants. You know what I'm saying? So like I listen to the audiobook first, and then I read. And so at this point, I've engaged with both books 4 times, twice listening, twice reading. And I also acknowledge that there was about at least 6 months, maybe closer to 10 months between the first 2 times and the second 2 times. And I say that because I want to acknowledge that, like, who I am as a person is very different than who I was as a person the first time I read these books, right? And I acknowledged in the episode about Fourth Wing that this series got me back into reading. It also, it just means a lot to me, just because it was a tool of connection between like me and my family, stuff like that, whatever. And where I am engaging with the book the second time, like I still have all those feelings, and so I just think it's important to acknowledge, as we get into this conversation, and I'm talking about my interpretations, which that's exactly what they are, right? Like my interpretations of the text of the story and my feelings about it may or may not be the same as yours. And I think all of that is sort of contingent upon who I am as a person, right? Like I'm not gonna yuck your yum. Like however you feel about the book. If you hate it, cool, live your best life. I'm not and I wouldn't expect that anybody would do that for me, right? Like I don't want that to happen for me either. So I think it's important not only in this conversation for me to contextualize that fact, but also for you to think about where you are sort of in your life, in your place, in your person, not only when you engage with just this story, but anything, generally speaking, right? Because who we are is going to influence how we interpret the world around us. So that's my therapy moment of the day. Just kidding. There's going to be a lot more. You know me. So let's get into it. There are 3 different sort of primary themes that I want to discuss from Iron Flame, and they very much mirror the conversation about Fourth Wing. And the 3 themes that I really want to focus on that I think were particularly salient for me in this book: the first, grief and loss; the second, the issue of trust; and third, issues of power. And for me, this is one of the reasons that I absolutely like stand for Rebecca Yarros. The way that she weaves all these things in just such a compelling way, like chef's kiss. Like she's absolutely amazing. I want to also acknowledge that I intentionally ordered the discussion in this way because I think it's very heavy at the beginning, and then it sort of gets a little bit more hopeful as we get towards the end. And so I want to also acknowledge that it is a bit like emotionally heavy, particularly as we get into the beginning of the discussion where we're talking about grief and loss. So, as I mentioned, in the first part of Iron Flame, the story is really focused on Violet returning to Basgiath and sort of going through her second year. So, she's a second year writer. She's a second year writer that is also very much changed, not only because of everything that she endured in her first year, right? Like getting through the gauntlet and threshing and like all of these various things that she had to endure just to get to sort of this next stage in her education, but also everything that happened at the end of Fourth Wing at the Battle of Ressen, right? She is not only changed again because of those experiences, but because of the new knowledge that she has now, right? And there's a quote that I feel like very much encompasses this idea of how experiences can really shape us, particularly in a space like Basgiath. And it is a quote from everyone's favorite, Zayden. And he says to Violet, "The first year is when some of us lose our lives. The second year is when the rest of us lose our humanity. It's all part of the process of turning us into effective weapons. And don't forget for a second that that's the mission here." End quote. He's just so awesome. He's just so wise. Nonetheless, I think Violet returns to Basgiath after this battle, after losing Liam. Moment of silence for Liam. So great. She returns to Basgiath, and she is trying to not only internally navigate all of this that has happened, right? Like, how do I live my life with all of this new knowledge, and how do I exist in this place where I know that this whole shit is built on lies, right? She also is unsure of how to navigate her experiences externally, right? So she's having this internal struggle. Also, how do I navigate relationships, and how do I just go back to class when I know the truth of all of these things? And how do I do that when I'm unable to sort of share that burden with the people that I care about the most? Rihanna and Sawyer Riddick, everybody's sort of in her squad, right? So Violet's chosen method of coping with all of this, with this internal strife, with this external strife, is to socially isolate. And social isolation is very simply just voluntary or involuntarily not having contact with other people. And so some people socially isolate because they choose to, as in Violet's case, and some people socially isolate sort of out of, I don't want to say necessity. I don't think that's the right word, but because that it is what it is. Maybe they seek social connection, but those things aren't available to them. So, nonetheless, Violet chooses to socially isolate, and we see that that very much does not work for her. Social isolation, I want to say very honestly and very clearly, is not inherently a bad thing. Again, inherent in the definition is you can choose to socially isolate or not. And I don't ever want to say that something is either all good or all bad, because sometimes it can be very refreshing, very enlightening to take time for yourself away from other people. Sometimes you need that, right? Like if you're constantly running around, constantly doing all the things, sometimes just a moment to be alone and just be is beneficial, right? So I don't want to say that social isolation is inherently a bad thing. I will say though, again, in Violet's case, it doesn't work for her because that's not who she is. Like she is a relational, empathic, compassionate person. And so I'm just going to be over here with my books in my room and not really engaging with other people. We see that it really starts to weigh on her. And so not only is Violet grieving sort of loss, so like the loss of Liam, the loss of the truth that she thought that she knew, she's also grieving who she was and who she thought she'd become, right? So she had, like many of us do, a vision of her life and what it would be like, and that was all sort of taken from her, just like Liam was taken from her, right? Sad. Oh my gosh, it hurt my soul just to say that. All of this is taken from her. So not only is she grieving, again, the loss of a very dear friend, but also the loss of who she thought she was, right? And so as we move into part two of the book, staying with this sort of theme of grief and loss and sort of how we manage that. Before leaving Bisguy, Violet makes a decision to tell her friends the truth about the wyvern, the venom, the dark wielders, basically that Bisguy has been over here lying about all the things. She makes that decision, right? Like, so she elects to no longer socially isolate, but to bring people in. She also dismantles the whole of Basgiath War College in about 5 minutes, which, girl, yes. I was here for that entire scene in the courtyard where they told everybody the truth and they were like, and what? What y'all about to do? Cool, what's up? So she did these things in a way, again, that is more authentic to her. Social isolation was not her thing. And when she changed the way that she was coping and the way that she was navigating, things started to, I'm going to say, quote, get better for her, because we all know in this space, in this story, getting better is relative. It's a relative term. And we see when she comes to Arisha, like bad things continue to happen. Like bad things continue to happen in the second half of the story. Most notably, and this is where I feel like it gets a bit heavy, is Violet loses her mom, which was that scene. Like, I don't know how many of you all have engaged the text, like listened to the graphic audio. Shout out, first of all, not only to the audiobook narrators, but to the people who do graphic audio. Like, it took me a minute, y'all. It took me a minute to really get into it because there were so many sounds, and like I couldn't focus on the talking because you can hear people like just sounds in the background and feet walking and people up against the wall. Like, what is happening here? And once I got used to it, I was like, why isn't every audiobook like this? Like, so shout out to the people at Graphic Audio. Like, please continue to do what you do and bring joy to the world. Nonetheless, Violet's mom's, General Sorrengail's death, whew, the first time I listened to it, just, in the audiobook and just with the narrator sort of reading it, it was too much. When I read it, it was too much. Listening to it with them actors and all them different voices, like even talking about it right now, like it's sitting on my chest. But nonetheless, Violet has done all of this throughout Iron Flame, right? Like throughout the story, she is finding different ways to navigate grief and loss. And then here at the end of the story, she suffers an unimaginable loss. Her mother, in front of her, right, like sacrifices herself, and it is something that, again, I don't think any amount of coping skills, relaxation techniques can prepare you to handle. And so, not only that, in the same day, within hours even, the great love of her life, she realizes Zayden has channeled magic from the earth, and now he got these crazy evil red eyes. And now she has seemingly lost two of the most important people in her life in the same day. Like, oh my goodness, yo, talk about grief and loss. And I think, again, what makes this so heavy is that we have seen, again, Violet's development over the course of this book, right? Her going through just such difficult experiences and learning to navigate those, and you feel like, yes, like she's finally there, and then boom. Things that you could not possibly imagine would happen absolutely happened to her. And they continue to, for Violet especially, cause her to question her worthiness, her judgment, her everything, right? So this, I think, is an excellent transition into talking about the next sort of theme that I feel like was pervasive in Iron Flame, and that is the issue of trust. And trust is absolutely something that also is influencing Violet's experiences of grief and loss. Because not only, again, is she grieving the loss of people, right? Liam, General Sorrengail, folks, right? She's, as I mentioned, grieving the loss of knowledge. And as we see particularly overtly in Iron Flame, she's also sort of grieving relationships. What she thought her relationships with people, i.e., Zayden, i.e., Dane, what she thought these relationships were and what they could be. And for her, and again, particularly central to the story of Iron Flame, a lot of these relationships are deteriorating because of what she experiences as a lack of trust and a lack of security in her relationships with other people. And Violet says to Zayden, and I quote, "I just feel heavy. I don't have anyone who knows who I really am anymore. The guy I considered my best friend nearly got us killed. I'm keeping secrets from Rhiannon, from my sister, from you. There's not a single person in this world I'm entirely truthful with." End quote. And so, again, this weight of loss, this weight of grief is further compounded by a lack of trust, not only in other people, but in herself. According to the American Psychological Association, trust is, quote, reliance on or confidence in the dependability of someone or something. Specifically, trust is the degree to which each person feels that they can depend on the other person to do what they say they will do. It is important to acknowledge that the key factor here is not honesty, but predictability. Trust is considered by most psychologists to be a primary component in, quote, mature relationships, whether we're talking about intimate relationships, social relationships, etc. And so trust is not only about honesty, which I think, again, is going to be a salient point as we move into talking about the trust that Violet has with other people in her life. So it's not necessarily just about how honest people are with you, but how well can you predict what they will do. And I don't mean predict like fortune telling, okay? Like we're not this that's a different book. That's a different book series, okay? For people to be fortune tellers and to be able to see the future. I'm not talking about that type of predictability. It is, are you about that life? Are you about what you say you're about, right? And so with that sort of understanding of what trust is, I'm going to take a minor sidebar. minor sidebar that maybe will infuriate some folks. Sorry, not sorry. But I want to talk specifically about Dane. And I know, again, them's fighting words for a lot of people, right? Um, Particularly because, again, when Violet returns to Basgiath at the beginning of Iron Flame, it is with this heaviness because she ostensibly learns that the reason that Liam died, the reason that they were in this whole shenanigan that they were in Resin, is because Dane took a memory from her and told his punk ass daddy. And all of this sort of, she feels responsible not only for sort of Dane violating her in that way, but also Satin, because this is like her oldest friend, her bestest friend in the whole wide world. So I want to take a sidebar and talk about Dane because let me just tell y'all. So this round of me engaging with the story, Dane's story hit different for me. Now let me preface this by saying I don't agree with anything that he did. It doesn't mean that he was not engaged in a high level of bitch assness, like that, some punk ass behavior. Like, absolutely, yes, 100%. What I do feel like hit me differently now, and I really want to credit the actor who voiced Dane in the graphic audio, because the way his sort of intonations and everything, the way I feel about Dane's story now is different because I absolutely can understand his angst. Maybe that's like a therapeutic, like an occupational hazard, right? Like as a therapist, like I just try to understand people where they are, sort of like meet them where they are and understand the world as they experience it. Nonetheless, I understand his angst, right? Like he done went through his whole first year. He's a second year, like squad leader, soon to be wing leader. He very much lives and dies by the rules because rules give you order. It takes away the uncertainty of having to make decisions for yourself, right? Like I understand, bro. Like I understand. It don't mean you need to be acting like this. I understand though. Again, I don't agree with his punk ass behaviors, but I understand. And I really am looking forward to seeing how Rebecca sort of continues this redemption arc because believe me, trust me, he's on his redemption arc. I will also say, random sidebar, that I have heard rumblings that some people think that Dane is the love interest and something terrible, I don't even know how I'm going to say this out loud, something terrible will happen to Zayden and Violet will return to Dane and that will be her person. Let me just tell you, Rebecca, I wish you could look into my eyes. Rebecca, please do not do that. Like, please do not do that. I will trust and acknowledge whatever you think is best for the story. Just know that I will be crushed if that is the case, right? Because another thing that I feel like is interesting about Dane, and it came through reading the bonus chapters in Fourth Wing from Zayden's perspective, but Dane is ostensibly to me like the epitome of privilege. Like his dad is like this high ranking person, and Dane, again, arguably through nepotism, has like gotten all these different opportunities and whatever. He's just like a rule follower, like a brown noser, whatever, right? And so if the story becomes that sort of personification of privilege is the hero in the end and he gets the things in the end, like that would just be so disheartening to me. And not that me and Rebecca like know each other like that, because we don't. I do want to acknowledge though that I don't think that she will do that. I think that that would sort of undo all that she's done with this story as it relates to oppressed people's like rising up, right? So that was just a random sidebar. To sort of close the loop on that, Dane, get yourself a therapist, bro. Like, I need you to talk it out a little bit. I understand. I don't affirm what you did. I absolutely can validate what and how and why you acted the way you did, but stop it. Stop it right now. Anywho, back to this issue of trust. So Violet doesn't trust Dane. Violet doesn't trust her leadership or professors at Basgiath. With good reason. She doesn't trust the new Vice Commandant, Varish, who is just, ugh. Again, shout out to the actor who voiced Major Varish in the graphic audio because I hated him even more when I heard his stupid voice. And no offense, not that you have a stupid voice, my person. I don't know. You did a great job. You did a great job. And again, most notably, so outside of not trusting these sort of external forces, these external factors, Violet doesn't trust herself. She doesn't trust herself with her friends. She doesn't trust herself with Zayden. She feels like she has become untrustworthy. And in thinking about her relationship with Zayden, again, she feels like she has been manipulated, led astray, and that she shouldn't feel the way that she does about him. And Violet says, and I quote, "I love him. No matter what he's done or why he did it, I still love him, and I know he cares about me." And throughout this sort of first part of Iron Flame, we sort of are privy to her internal conflict of like, she loved this dude, but she feels like she shouldn't, so then she feels bad about it. And if I had a nickel for every time I worked with someone in a therapeutic space, talked to a family member, talked to anybody, right? Talk to my damn self about feeling some kind of way about something that I felt was authentic to me and feeling guilty or that it shouldn't be, right? Case in point, because we live in a society that is very much values like productivity and getting things done and sort of grind culture and all these things. How many of you, and I'm talking to myself, how many of you have felt guilty for taking time for yourself, right? Like you feel authentically in your bones that you need a break, that you need time to get away, that you need whatever, and then guilt settles in as if you're doing something wrong by doing that, right? Like that is a lack of trust within yourself and within your sort of authentic feelings, and that is what we see from Violet here when she returns to Basgiath. She doesn't trust what she knows, how she feels, what she is, right? And I think that the sort of ultimate scene in the first part of Iron Flame that really starts to reinstill this sort of internal trust that Violet has for herself. This happens when she is being held by Varish and tortured. I think this is not only a turning point in the story, but a turning point sort of in Violet's character development in a number of different ways, right? So, also, every time, just like the death scene, like Violet's mom's death scene and Liam's death scene, this sort of torture scene is difficult for me every single time, every time. And I think it's just the descriptive nature of it. Like, it's not overly descriptive, like, it's not like Hostel, like a horror movie. It's descriptive enough, though. And I think that the way that the characters, not only Violet, but Major Varish, have sort of been developed, you just kind of, oh, you're just there. And again, in the graphic audio, it's like next level. So, this whole like torture scene is just a lot. But nonetheless, for Violet, I think she is confronted with death very, very explicitly, right? Like she is dying physically. Also, she's sort of confronted with death on a more sort of metaphysical, in a more metaphysical way, where, spoiler alert, Liam is there with her, like as she is going through all of this, right? And I think that not only is this a sort of pivotal point in the narrative because we now like transition into like the whole revolution and Arisha and that whole storyline. Also, I think it is because Violet realizes, because she is confronted with death, that like we don't got time to be out here playing these games, right? Like she realizes that life is too short for us to be out here not acknowledging how we feel, for us to not do what we want to do, right? And Violet says, as she's sort of near death for like the umpteenth time, quote, "I love him, Zayden. I should have told him every day, been honest about my feelings, even through the fights and the doubt. Now, instead of giving those feelings back to Zayden, they'll die with me." End quote. And so that, I think, again, to me is pivotal, and it is something that we again experience so often in our own lives, right? Like how many of us have had an experience where you have really been called to question like how you are being, what you are doing, how you're thinking, right? So whether that be, hopefully not for many of us, like a near death experience, or you lose someone that you care about, or you lose a job or whatever, right? Like something happens in your life that really serves as a catalyst for you to think about the authenticity of how you're moving through the world, because like point blank period, we have one life. We have one life to live, not the soap. Okay, Young and the Restless all day, every day. But we have one life, right? And how we choose to navigate that is absolutely up to us. And so, what I think also served as sort of a catalyst for Violet in this part of the story, and to me is like, whew, Ooh, again, next level writing, Rebecca. So not only does she sort of survive this near death experience, but she also gets something that she has sort of been craving, asking for, desiring, right? And that is for Zayden to acknowledge how he feels about her. And listen, y'all, indulge me because I'm about to read this because this is beautiful. It is beautifully written. It was beautifully sort of set up in the story. Like, so you're welcome. Zayden says, and I quote, "You want to know something true? Something real? I love you. I'm in love with you. I have been since the night the snow fell in your hair and you kissed me for the first time. I'm grateful my life is tied to yours because it means I won't have to face a day without you in it. My heart only beats as long as yours does. And when you die, I'll meet Malik at your side. It's a damn good thing that you love me too because you're stuck with me in this life and every other that could possibly follow." End quote. Y'all, after I read this, I told my husband, like, listen, sir, when we renew our vows, whenever that may be, you better get your life together and write something like poetic like this. You know what I'm saying? Like, that shit was next level. Like, so beautiful. Very beautifully written, very beautifully done. And so after all of this, enduring this torture, surviving Varys stabbing him with in his stupid face, finally getting what she's so been seeking, right? The connection she's been seeking with Xaden, him being very explicit about his feelings. After all of this, I think Violet sort of commits again to being different and doing differently in her relationships with other people in her life, right? So as we talked about before, social isolation didn't work for her, right? Now she's sort of in this place where again she sort of wants transparency, right? What does that look like? And so she agrees not only to do that herself, to be transparent in the way that she is with Zayden and with other people, but also to request that from him and to sort of seek that from him. And so Violet is really navigating sort of this new way of being, right? So how can she rebuild trust in her relationship with Zayden, particularly as he continues to tell her, like, girl, I can't be all on, I can't be 100% transparent with you. Like, I just can't. Like, I'm the leader of a revolution. Like, I can't do that. You can ask me stuff and I'll answer it. And if I can't answer it, I'll tell you, right? And so Violet is having difficulty sort of navigating that reality because that's not necessarily what she wants for herself. She knows she loved this man though, and so like, how are we gonna make it work? And again, I think what makes it even more difficult is that new quote secrets continue to arise, right? Like Violet learns that Zayden was betrothed to Kat, who is just like a bitch the whole time to her, right? Like then she get beat up, and was I secretly cheering for Violet to beat up Kat when they were fighting? Absolutely 100%. I was like, whoop that trick. Nonetheless, that's a secret. Violet learns. She also learns, spoiler alert, about Zayden's second signet, right? And I'm going to take just a slight deviation, just one more sidebar. I know and I have heard that for many people, Violet is like an unlikable character. And part of that dislike for her is related to her not acknowledging that she is, quote, like part of the problem in her relationship with Zayden, right? Like her not acknowledging that she can't expect all these things from him and she's not doing her part, right? Yes, and I much like Dane, I think I am experiencing Violet. I wouldn't necessarily say in a different way because I've always liked her as a character, right? Like I think she's a bad bee, right? Like I think that I am realizing maybe or acknowledging some different things about her character that I particularly appreciate. And I think one is like Violet got insecurities. And let me tell y'all something. Like I'm somebody's whole wife, a whole doctor, a whole daughter, sister, professor, all of these things, and still am many times often overcome by insecurities, like feeling like it's not enough. Like whatever, it's not enough. My husband could give me a whole Zayden Ryerson love confession, and I'd still be like, but do you really mean that though? You know what I'm saying? Like, for us to be privy to this sort of internal dialogue that she has with herself and her own insecurities, and for us to really be privy to the way her insecurities influence her relationships with other people, like Rebecca Yarros, like, can you, like, just not write a whole self help book without us knowing, right? Like, for those of you who have read A Court of Thorn and Roses, that series by Sarah J. Maas, to me, the last book in that series, the most recent book focused on Nesta, is this, right? Like it is a self-help, like love yourself, like you are that bitch. Like it is that, right? And I think we see that with Violet, not only in her, again, her like matriculation through Basgiath, but also I think Iron Flame, what it does differently is that here Violet sort of coming into her own and learning to trust herself is not just about power. There's so much that is influenced by her relationships with other people. And what I appreciate about that is that, again, Violet from the very beginning, from when she gave Rhiannon her boot to cross the parapet, has been that person who's been like compassionate, empathic about other people. She's not Zayden. She's not like a ruthless, like I'm gonna be over here by myself, like glaring at everybody. Just, you know what I'm saying? That's not her. And she tried for that to be her, and it's not her. And I think that we see in Iron Flame her journey to understanding that that's not her and that doesn't make her less than. Like wanting the support and connection of other people doesn't make you less than. And I think what people point to as sort of like annoying, quote unquote, about her, like her insecurities and her sort of just like whatever, I don't find that annoying. I find it relatable. I find it authentic. I find it to be so beautifully human, right? And so there's something about that that I think is so powerful, which you see how I did that? You see how I just set that up? Is an amazing segue and transition to this last piece that I wanted to talk about, this last theme of the book that I wanted to talk about, and that is related specifically to ideas of power, right? So power is a central theme to this story, Iron Flame, Fourth Wing, this series, it in so many ways. And I referenced in the episode on Fourth Wing that this is why I love this series so much. When I had got to ask Rebecca Yarros a question, that one time I had met her and stuff, you know what I'm saying? It's a flex, but whatever. I shared with her like that is part of what draws me to this narrative, right? Is the explicit discussions of power. And I think Iron Flame does so more overtly than we saw in Fourth Wing, and not because, you know, Fourth Wing is bad, because I just think it's the nature of the development of the story. And so again, part one of Iron Flame focused on Basgiath War College, right? Like at Basgiath, the leadership there has what we refer to as legitimate power, which is basically requiring obedience from people, right? Like, so leadership can require obedience from these cadets in this military college. They also have what we call informational power, which is the ability to access and use information, right? Like the scribes write something and it's truth, right? And so in the beginning of Iron Flame, as Violet is sort of back as at Basgiath, she has this newfound awareness of how these systems of power are functioning, right? And with that awareness, and because she is super tight and so smart, she is now navigating this system with an awareness of this power in a way that benefits her and the revolution. So what does she do? She bring in Jacinia. And I know at first everybody's like, whoa, why are you bringing people into this? Like, you're endangering other people. Cool. Yes, and she understands, because she was to become a scribe, she understands how invaluable scribes are to the movement, right? And so she brings in one that she feels like she can trust. And that we see becomes like a very pivotal part of the story, and in a very pivotal part of what they are doing to sort of forward their cause, right? As I referenced, Violet also elects to tell her squad the truth. She understands that part of the bullshit that is sort of Basgiath and this whole secret that they're keeping is that they're not giving folks the opportunity to make decisions for themselves. And she realizes that she was doing the same thing with her squad, people that she purports to care about, right? So she elects to tell them the truth, right? And everything with Major Varish to me is demonstrative of power and how it functions. And I think one thing that I invite folks to consider here, and it's something that I've been thinking about sort of as I've re-engaged with the books over time, is there's this idea that Varish was, quote, misusing his power. And I would actually argue that he was not misusing his power. He was functioning in a system that was designed for him to be able to do exactly what he did, right? Like, let me also just reinforce bullet point, asterisk, point blank, period, say none of what he did was okay, right? Like all of that was some bullshit. The way that he tortured her, the way that he was just so gross and everything that he did, like none of that is okay, right? And the system, the codex, Basgiath War College leadership structure, all of that allowed him to do what he was doing. So did he, quote, misuse his power? I would argue not. Was he over the top extra? Absolutely yes. But was he doing anything that he wasn't permitted to do? I would argue no, right? And I think that again, that is something that to me, the fact that Rebecca Yarros wove that narrative into something without explicitly saying it, but that's what she's saying. Like, that's why she's super tight. She's so tight, and I love her so much. Anywho, in Orisha, I think Violet has her own sort of journey to empowerment, right? Because again, as we've been talking about throughout the course of this conversation, she is learning how to be with this new knowledge about the revolution, with this new knowledge about the world. She's learning how to be in a different way with her friends. She's learning how to trust again. And I think her experiences in Orisha after enduring all of this that she has are so empowering, not only to her, but to me as a reader. Like, just, I can't even. So, she finds her own sort of individual, and when I say power, I'm referring to like agency. She becomes aware of the things that she can and cannot control. And what we have 100% control over, good people, spoiler alert, like this is going to be revolutionary what I'm about to say, right? You have 100% control over your feelings. 100% control. That doesn't mean that other people don't influence us. That doesn't mean that at all. It doesn't mean that we live in a bubble and nothing that happens in the external world or nothing that people say affects us. That's not what I'm saying. At the end of the day, you are 100% in control of your feelings. And I think that Violet comes to understand that, particularly in her relationship with Zayden. So after all of these secrets are unveiled, right? Like everything about the revolution, her cat, the second signet, like him and Violet are fighting for like the 500th time. And when they decide that they're going to make up and like, okay, let's talk this out, Violet says to him, quote, I love you. You could throw my entire world into upheaval and I would still love you. You could keep secrets, run a revolution, frustrate the shit out of me, probably ruin me, and I would still love you. I can't make it stop. I don't want to. You're my gravity. Nothing in my world works without you. End quote. So not only is that like disgustingly adorable and beautiful, I think again it is her sort of acknowledging that that is her authentic feeling, and she is electing and choosing to make that her truth. And that is 99.9% of the time that I'm working with somebody in a clinical space in therapy, my goal is to get them to a space where they feel empowered. Empowered to own and acknowledge their authentic feelings, thoughts, etc. This entirety before this moment, right? Like Violet was navigating her love for Zayden and sort of judging herself because she felt like it wasn't what she was supposed to be doing or how she should feel. Who decides how you should? Who decides what you should be doing? At the end of the day, it's you. And that to me is what empowerment is acknowledging and understanding that you decide what your should is, right? Violet not only decides that in her relationship with Zayden, but also in her ways of being and in her ways of thinking and really owning what it is that she values. So when the decision point comes for her to think about, do they stay in Orisha or do they go back to Basgiath to defend the hatching grounds? Like for her, it's like, no question, we about to go do what we do, because if we don't, we're no better than the people that we say we're fighting against, right? And so I think that Violet's journey of empowerment is so, again, there's something about it that is so not only inspiring but familiar, right? It is not easy to overcome insecurity. It is not easy to find your power, find your voice, to live in that, right? Like it is not easy. And I don't know how many like self-help motivational speakers or self-help books will tell you that you just got to do this. Absolutely not. It is difficult. There is a whole 600-page book that I'm talking about right now that is someone's whole journey to doing that, right? And so I don't want to diminish the courage, the strength, the effort it takes to step into your power, right? And I feel like what we see with Violet is something that is again so authentic and beautiful, and I absolutely cannot wait to see how she continues to embody this power in the next book. So come on, Rebecca, come on, because at this point, at the time of this recording, it's about 2 weeks until I get my hands on that third book, and when I tell y'all I cannot wait, I absolutely cannot wait. And so to bring this conversation to a close, as always, my compliment sandwich as it relates to Iron Flame. And so, in terms of something good, other than everything that I've already said for the past 45 minutes, something good, I love this series. I enjoyed both books every time I read them, right? Like every time I engaged. Love, love, love them. For me, Iron Flame hits a little bit differently because the relationship and sort of the dynamic between Zayden and Violet is a little bit more overt. Because obviously that we're past the point of like enemies to lovers, like they're together now, right? And to see them and to read about them sort of navigating their relationship, I think very overtly, that spoke to me, right? Like it's something that I very much appreciated. I think also these sort of more overt discussions of the revolution and oppression and all of these things. Again, that was present at the end of Fourth Wing, and naturally we got more of that here as more of that was brought to light. And so I think Iron Flame just hit differently for me because of that. And again, because I could see myself in Violet as someone who lived my life a certain way, and then you sort of have a moment of awareness where you realize like all that you have done and thought is not it. And I think this happens for a lot of us, right? Like in different moments in our lives, like when you stop seeing your parents as heroes and start seeing them as people, right? Like that can be very jarring. That increased awareness can be jarring, and sort of how we meet that, I think, is important. And that, for me, is what Iron Flame is about. And that is why I absolutely loved it. I think the character development over the course of this book so beautifully demonstrates the complexities of human nature and emotion, right? Like we're going beyond morally gray characters, right? Like we're going beyond that to people who are authentically fallible or infinitely complex. And to me, that is just so, so, so reflective of what it means to be a human being in the world, that like I can't thank Rebecca Yarros enough. Like she's super tight. In terms of the middle of this compliment sandwich, like it's very hard for me to think about something I don't like about this book. It's also the reason that I don't rate any of the books that I read, right? Like on my Goodreads or whatever. Like I don't rate things because I would just give everything 5 stars. Because again, one, I'm not about to yuck somebody's yum. And two, like if it makes me happy, like I love it. So the one thing I will say though, like Rebecca, how dare you? And I say this with jest, do whatever you want, girl. But how dare you leave us on that cliffhanger? Like now, and I'm saying that now when I only got 2 weeks to wait to figure out what happened. But the first time after I finished this, and I knew it was like a year, girl, I didn't know what I was gonna do. And so that cliffhanger was too much for me. And as someone who is not patient, the anxiety, bro, that has caused me, I just can't even. Lastly, in terms of something that I'll say about this book that I feel like is valuable, and it's a quote from the beginning of the book actually. And Violet says, "Because love at its root is hope, hope for tomorrow, hope for what could be, hope that someone you've entrusted your everything to will cradle and protect it, and hope that shit is harder to kill than a dragon." And the reason I appreciate this quote is that I am not someone that anyone, anyone really, would describe as positive or optimistic. I'm more so someone who many would describe as cynical. I would describe myself more as realist, whatever, whatever labels. But what I will say is I strive, desire to be someone that makes space for hope, that makes space for optimism, and it is an intention that I have personally sort of vowed to work toward, right? And so this quote, this book, this everything, this series is something that I feel like reinforces and validates for me that that's not something that happens overnight. That's not something that you just wake up one day and say like I'm going to be a positive person, or I'm going to be this, or I'm going to be that, and it just happens, right? And that's not what I want for me. Like naturally, big Taurus energy, I want the most difficult journey that there is. And I think that this series, this book, is a beautiful portrayal of that. And with that, Rebecca Yarros, just keep doing what you do, because I love you, and we are all, the world is better for it. And with that, good people, hit me up if you want to talk about anything that I said at Dr. Vanessa _hints on all forms of social media. Hit me up. Let's talk about it. Once Onyx Storms comes out and I read it like 3 or 4 times, I'll be back to talk to you all about how I feel about that as well. Until then, I wish you and your families safety, health, and joy. Until next time, good people.